Hey Slayers, welcome back to Empress Fiction, episode 2, where we're going to be continuing to read Bifrost. But if you missed it in the last episode, we'd had a first meeting here. Some electric energy, something spicy, a little between them. Things are brewing. Things are on their way. We got to meet the Allfather, and we found, he's pretty intent on keeping Kirk for his own. And Astrid, she's not sure what to do about that yet, I don't think. What do you think?
It's exciting. It's knowing now that we have two, three major players in the story. I'm interested to see what's going to happen going forward with all the pieces where they land on the table.
Yeah, that's true. We do have some major players already. We have the Allfather, we have Odin, we have Astrid, we have Kirk. We do definitely have some themes brewing here. I don't want to give too much away because we're still in the middle of the first chapter, so let's get into it. And as always, Slayers, this book is available on SlayerPublishing.com. If you want to buy the print, the ebook, it is available to you there. Chapter 1, page 31. Their walk into the village was largely silent. Kirk greeted his people here and there, wishing them good night. Soon the cobbled streets turned to dirt roads, with acres of farms behind wooden fences. Ashford spoke softly once or twice, questioning him on how long some of the families had cultivated the land and their hopes of harvest and trade. He answered each inquiry with measure. There was little he did not know of their livelihood and past. It was evident that he cared very much for each person and their safety. As he recalled a rogue goat from the farm up ahead a fortnight prior, he released a hearty laugh. Ashford felt her cheeks warm, adding to the heat of the summer night. His joy was alluring. Farm turned to paved village streets once more as they made their way uphill. When looking behind, the castle wall lorded over the large family homes beneath it. Lanterns hung high on the posts of bronze along the path, calling her to look up at the stone spires reaching high into the sky. His ancestral home was breathtaking, with arches and pillars that looked to be carved from the finest stonemasons. Kirk waved to the guards on the walk across the bridge over the calm river cutting through the grassland. As they reached the encampment beyond the village, injured soldiers lied wherever there was space. Coughing, blood, and buckets of sick shuffled back and forth as healers dashed around. Ashford held her heart. This was the vision of war she despised. Honor was her calling, but war was her bane. She had to do something. Kirk? The king stopped walking beside her as she looked drained. This tame repercussion of battle wasn't enough to unsteady her, was it? Surely your people need to rest, she questioned, hinting at her desire. Kirk furrowed and nodded. He gave more orders to the guards and healers to close the camp and rest for the night. It was very clear in his communication that he wished for respect and gave it just as easily. Although the healers looked unhappy parting with the dying, they collected their baskets and left silently, eyeing the sultry mystery woman who was making a request of their king. As the camp quieted and only they were left, Kirk watched her move her dress swiftly and kneel at the feet of the nearest soldiers struggling for air. War was cold and undiscriminating. Young or old, good or bad, death would take you all the same. That's Eric's oldest son. The blond man you spoke with in the hall? He saw her cheek turn slightly to him, listening. I told him he could return home to prepare for his passing, but he refused to leave my side. His family has been a part of our king's guard since the early years of our house. He paused and removed his gloves, handing them to her. Some of my men may seem callous. It's more that they're wary of anyone who may take what they've given generations of dedication to. Ashford sighed and touched the young man's bloody blonde beard. She could see the resemblance now. He would be dead by morning. She gestured to the boy and the other wounded warriors. Can I? Kirk stepped forward and stopped her hand as it started to glow. You would take him for Valhalla before his time? Ashford looked up into his face and shook her head. His men weren't the only people slow to trust. Have faith, Lord Roduguay, she said simply, holding his silver gaze until he released her. Kirk watched as she began to sing quietly in prayer, Her words vibrated through him, filling the air with energy and light. He shielded his eyes as began to blind him. Asher continued to pray as she walked through the camp, rousing the men who had been near death. Blue flesh began to turn pink and red once more as they left death's door and laid into peaceful sleep. Flashes of light played around those injured the most. Although not returning limbs and flesh, it closed and healed their injuries to keep them alive. She took a deep breath as she finished her round through the tents, rewarded with only quiet crickets chirping and peaceful warrior snores. Kirk watched as Eric's sun began to rouse. It was his turn to look as if all the color had drained from his face. He bent down and touched his shoulder. "Sleep, son. Your father will be here in the morning." The boy agreed and lied down once more. There was not a speck of blood to be seen. Ashford could feel Kirk stare behind her as he attempted to make sense of what he had seen. The rich blue banners cracked in the wind, picking up in the night, cutting through the silence. Shivers erupted on her arms, his gaze soft like felt sliding over her bared skin. She picked up her dress and turned back to the bridge they crossed. The night was getting no warmer. "We should return to the castle." Over her shoulder, her eyes illuminated the night. Kirk felt their warmth as clearly as he could a stone hearth. What trickery from the gods came in the form of this woman? "Coming?" Ashford beckoned, uprooting his feet from the ground. Silence hung between them yet again, but Ashford broke it. "You took quite a few losses." He moved behind her, guiding her in the direction they would go, as the street winded. Lord Hevarth ignored the call. It was my duty to answer. He looked behind themselves at the sleeping camp. "You healed them?" "Yes," she said shortly. "Why?" he returned. She watched the top of the castle stairs and picked up a lit candle holder to carry with her through the midnight garden. She stopped and watched the candlelight flicker on his face. A question for a question. Kirk admired her audacity to make orders and games of him in his own home. Holding to the railing, he approached her, climbing the steps between them, and stood at the top beside her, his height pouring over her as the candle did little in the dark hall. She could feel his body's warmth in front of her as his silver gaze caught moonlight from the stained glass windows. "I healed them because you wished for it." "I said nothing of the kind," he replied, before leading her further into the castle hall. She laughed quietly. "You did not have to say anything. I could feel your longing." He quieted for a moment. Truthfully, he had felt their loss was regrettable, and he may have thought he had wished for them to stay, but how could she have known? "How?" Ashford cut him off. "A question for a question." She heard him mutter in agreement once more. "How old are you, Lord Roduguay?" Kirk stopped his walking again, the silence speaking for itself as he gave her a look of warning. "I imagine no older than you." With a smile, she stopped alongside him as he motioned to the room to their left. Unhappy with the possibility of parting just yet, Ashford looked further down the hallway where carved wooden double doors with torches on either side rested on the wall. "Are those your quarters?" He nodded, lifting a hand in the direction to allow her entry. She followed him inside and removed her cloak. The room was grand. Banners of different hues of blue hung for the cities and Karth, with the Grothan royal blue hanging the largest over the bed with a silver boar etched into the tapestry. The bed stretched nearly the entirety of the wall, with bookshelves lined every other wall, and a desk sat close to the fireplace that reached to the ceiling. Asher took a seat next to the fireplace and rested her cloak beside her. "How nice it must be to be king," she said, provoking him purposefully, enjoying the way his eyebrow twitched as he sat on the low table in front of her. Kirk felt her assessing him just as he did her, their proximity both out of intrigue and distrust. In her deep blue dress, with her brown skin illuminated with the sapphire's reflection, she was more beautiful than anyone he had ever brought to his bed. Under different circumstances, he supposed he would want to take her too. But unlike the lovers of his past, she was something dangerous. More secrets lay behind her lips than she cared to whisper. Astrid appreciated his gaze, The way he considered her a woman and admired her even after seeing her divinity at work was heartwarming. It was easy for men to tremble at the hands of power that they did not possess, and yet Kirk appreciated, perhaps even respected her more for it. Firm broad shoulders and hair of black pitch falling gently into light silver eyes struck something within her. Surprise would not befall her if she discovered he was an experienced and giving lover. She wanted to bite her lip as she thought about how strong his arms would feel holding her where she could not run away. But matters above the belt mattered today. "May I see your palm?" Kirk eyed her as her slender brown fingers reached out for the white of his hand. She smiled to reassure him. "I won't hurt you." He lifted his hand, hovering it above hers as the energy between them charged with tension. Finally, he placed his large hand in hers, covering it completely. She took her other hand to his palm, traveling the tan lines gently with her fingertips. She watched as his face contorted with confused, tickled pleasure. He was fun to tease. Suddenly she motioned a grab from her waist and pulled a gold knife adorned with fine black leather from what seemed like thin air. Kirk had no time to register the materialized weapon before she gripped his hand and held it in place, slashing his tender flesh with her blade. A deep line of firm red sprung through the cream of his skin with a roar of searing hot pain. He stood, blood dripping from his squeezed pink palm. Ashford laughed as he jumped up, fury twisting his handsome face. "Okay, maybe I will. Just a little." Kirk was certain she was crazy. What demon had spawned her? Ashford quieted her laughs as he stared confused at his gashed palm. They both waited. As seconds turned to minutes, his confusion rose. She saw him eyeing his palm, flexing it in the hopes of starting its regeneration. This king of men was not truly human, after all. "Are you wondering why it's not healing?" Kirk matched her gaze, her tone assuming as she challenged him to tell her it wasn't true. He was divine, and she knew it. Ashford sighed and smoothed her dress where his blood had splattered it. Healing for the divine was simple and typically instantaneous. She supposed he was wondering why the process had not yet started for him. "Don't feel bad. You aren't losing your touch." She took the Aesir knife from beside her and turned the hilt for him to take. Kirk hesitated and took the knife from her small hand gently. It was truly ornate. Its metal seemed to radiate its own heat with runic carvings on the blade. "This is not of Midgard, is it?" If it had been Midgardian metal, he would have healed without thought. She shook her head. Her earrings grazed her collarbone as she moved. "Your enemies are my enemies, and together they are stronger." She reached out for his palm again. "I'll be nice this time, I promise." Feeling foolish, Kirk gave it to her again. This time, she smoothed her hand through the rivet of blood seeping from his irritated skin, allowing its warmth to cover her fingers. His blood seemed to carry so much life and longing. Ashford heard him wince and pulled him closer to where she sat. She closed his large fist and brought it closer to her lips. His eyes softened as she kissed the back of his hand softly. The hairs on his skin tickled her nose, and she heard him sigh. His fingers held her own as she looked up into his eyes and healed him with her lips. Kirk felt her heart beating through her skin with her kiss, when suddenly overwhelming pleasure and joy washed over him. He looked into her eyes as they seemed to shift in waves of honey. His pointer finger extended to touch her cheek. He felt fire in his soul. Ecstasy reigned, his arousal peaking. His palm itched to wrap around his length to alleviate the scorching desire crawling in his skin. Ashford watched him struggle happily and released him as his palm returned to its healed state. Kirk eyed his palm again and found no evidence of injury. Even the splatter on her dress had disappeared. Was that what her healing touch felt like? He sat down as he regained control of his emotions. What other powers did she have? "When you say our enemies, your Orpharn, the Ash Mountain dwellers that are revolting, burning down your villages, killing this land's people, etc., have been seemingly blessed recently." She stood and approached the fire to watch it dance. The seriousness of the matter was dire. It was the need of Valir. She had experienced the matter herself. Do you know of Suitor? Kirk nodded. Are you to tell me the king of the fire Jotun has blessed the Orpharn? What could they do for him? The dwellers were a people strengthened by flame and ash. This was true. But how had they made their ancestral connection to Muspelheim? Astrid wrung her hands and attempted to seem unbothered. Ragnarok made for unlikely pairings. Surtur had promised the Asgardians fire and blood. He would not stop until they were all vanquished. For this he needed allies, and so did they. Yes, it seems your ash dwellers have prayed to their god long enough. He has blessed them and their forges with the fires of Muspelheim, which you so graciously experienced tonight. The right metal steeped in these flames will kill all who encountered it, divine and human alike. Kirk clenched his fist. What chance did man or any other Midgardian race have against weapons that could kill gods? Our councils must know about this. We stand little chance against them if it is true. Dwellers couldn't have enough ore themselves to make these weapons. How are they getting it? Oh, it's true, she chortled. A legion of Lord Cardy's men found that out yesterday. I won't spoil you with the details, but it was over fairly quickly. He gave her only a look for her bitter remark. Astrid felt silent and raised a hand in apology. Nevertheless, that is why I am here. It seems that Surtur is a problem for us both, and Odin himself finds your odds unfair. She sat across from him as he paced. As I said, your enemies are now our enemies, and Surtur is coming straight for Asgard with the help of your ash dwellers. Kirk held the mantle as he pondered her words. Could what she said be trusted? The gods often help themselves under the guise of helping others. How could he be sure she wasn't there to serve herself? Astrid leaned on the side of the cushioned chair and crossed her legs, draping the dress over her knees as she continued to think in silence. She placed one hand over the other and waited quietly. Yes, please do take your time. There is only a war on. Kirk looked at her as she considered her surroundings. Was he supposed to take her at her word? How do you know the Orpharn have been blessed the way you say they are? Astrid nearly laughed. She stifled it as he continued to stare blankly at her. He was serious. You think I've only ever watched you fight? Humans are fun, but not that fun. Kirk rolled his eyes. So you've seen them, with these same Aesir weapons. Astrid squinted briefly and swayed her head side to side. Not exactly. Aesir weapons are made from Svartalfheim ore on Nidavellir, the dwarven homeworld on Yggdrasil. Your problem is a little bit more local. Kirk wiped his face. Things were beginning to be clear. Months ago, he had heard rumors he thought were baseless, that the Orpharn had been kidnapping dwarves or at the very least raiding mines in Hiatsi, the dwarven country on Imrad. But when he sent an inquiry to their king, Cloy, he had heard nothing in return. So you suspect that the dwarves in Hiatsi are being made to forge weapons for the Orpharn? I don't suspect. I know, Astrid said matter-of-factly. This blade was forged in Nidavellir by the ancient dwarves there, and your Orpharn are utilizing ore from the descendant dwarves here on Midgard. Your dwarves are officially forging weapons capable of killing immortals, hence our mutual problem. So the gods just didn't care about us dying before it affected them? Kirk questioned coldly as she took a removed view of the war ravishing his home. Astrid scoffed. It was not all so simple. We aren't meant to pick sides. They could kill each other as much as they wished, but crossing realms would be disastrous for them all. Because you win either way, don't you? Kirk pressed. No matter the reason for battle, Odin got his cut of the warrior's souls. That much was certain. Astrid calmed herself before she spoke again. To be Valkyrie was not a task she expected him to understand. Lord Verduke was certainly testy. But she looked at how menacing he looked in anger. It scratched an itch of attraction in her that she didn't care for presently. Dying is not a win for anyone, Lord Verduke. Trust I know that. And you say us as if you're mortal as well. Kirk went silent again and rubbed his palms where she had slashed him. Who's to say that I am not? Astrid blew air in disbelief. We both know that's not true. Go on, remind me of how old you are. Whatever identity crisis he was having, it made him no less immortal. She could feel it. It was why he was not fated to die anytime soon, and why the Allfather wanted him desperately. You're beginning to look younger than Eric. You know that, don't you? Astrid stood and softly grazed his shoulder in admiration. But old age does look good on you, Lord Roduque. Kirk's jaw ticked at her taunting. He had not been the only one to know who he was dealing with. But did she know who he was connected to immortally? He thought not. He hoped to keep it that way. Astrid couldn't help feeling smug. It was a natural challenge. I'll leave you for the night, my lord. I am weary for my travels. A thought came to her that she could not ignore. She summoned an item and sat it on his desk. A gift for you before I go, to demonstrate goodwill for our new partnership. Kirk didn't look back as she left. With the clang of the heavy door closing, he took a breath. He looked at what she placed on the desk. It was a wooden walking stick. In the silence, Kirk felt himself smile. She was equal parts frustrating and charming. Her vicious flirting was exhausting and yet enjoyable. He looked forward to their next meeting. Strong end, I think, on that one.
My goodness, did she just call him old?
She called him absolutely ancient, dinosaur bones,
My
old.
goodness.
Yeah. Old. Okay, so first chapter's over. What are our thoughts?
I was going to ask you, Miss Author, what are some of the things that really stuck out to you, being a reader of your book now?
Yeah.
What are some things?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because I've never read aloud this much of my book before, so to hear the names pronounced and also to just hear how funny some of these lines are. Just saying them out loud makes me go, oh my gosh, these characters have absolutely no filter. This is why they get into so many fights, like why people want to fuck them up, because you can't talk to people like that. Oh my gosh. But I think it adds a lot of personality to them. So it's a really interesting dynamic reading my own things aloud now. What did you think of their relationship so far? Because clearly Kirk and Astrid, that's who we're shipping, right?
Yeah, well, of course, they're the main characters.
Mm-hmm.
You have to ship the main characters in a romance. What other relationships are there that we have? We have Astrid and Odin, and their
Yeah.
yeah.
Their father-daughter relationship, and then Eric and Kirk, they're cousins. They've clearly been together their whole lives. I love that little story that they tell where they talk about picking on the cook's daughter and how Eric only did it because, he was into her. Like, Eric's a dog a little bit, okay? He's a dog. He's been around.
Oh,
And Kirk, it was always like the responsible, like step-in sibling. So I think it was really... I love listening to that part of the story. I do really like that.
have we been introduced to Thor and Loki yet?
We have not. And in keeping with the tradition of Norse mythology, of course, we will be seeing them because thematically, Astrid being Odin's daughter, she would have two siblings, right? So she does have Thor and Loki. And there's something a little additional going there. I don't know if I should talk about it quite yet.
No spoilers.
I don't think
No
so.
spoilers.
There's something a little additional going on there. It's an interesting dynamic. And, like I've said before in this series, this is quite literally a long saga of books that are planned. So this is the first book. It's the prequel, right, to the series, and this sets up a lot. But we have a lot of interesting dynamics, and we're going to be playing with themes of time and fate, and
so of course, as is Norse mythology,
as is right bread and butter for Norse mythology. So.
Well, what I was going to ask in that statement too or that question, I guess, rather, is there any kind of similarity that Astrid's noticing between like these siblings being Kirk and Eric, and then her siblings, her two older brothers?
Yeah, I think Astrid hasn't noticed very much between them yet because she only got that initial reaction, but I think she's very intuitive. And I think the dynamic between Thor and Loki will be pretty clear. They are not nearly as simpatico as Eric and Kirk, and we'll discover that. We will discover that.
And then this being so deeply seated in Norse mythology and how we've seen it kind of breathe a new, or have a new life breathed into it over the last decade or so with pop culture and modern cinema. How close do your characters sort of gear towards being more pop culture influenced versus more thematically traditional?
Yeah, like based off the original stories and the prose edit and things like that.
Yeah, where do your guys sort of sit on that scale?
I think you brought up an excellent point. Pop culture recently has made mythology pop off. Really pop off with Marvel. You have,
God of War, Vikings,
all those shows. And shout out to Lore Olympus too, webtoon by Rachel Smith. Hopefully I said that right. But that additionally brought new life to Greek mythology, because we love seeing these stories that we cherish painted in different visions, and she's done that really well. But I think for me, Bifrost is really based off of the original workings of Norse mythology, because I love history, love everything to do with history. Like, two of my most valued books are leather-bound copies of, the Gettysburg Address that you bought me from Barnes and Nobles, and Common Sense. So it's really important to me that historically, like, of course, we'll change things and align with the vision of Bifrost, but it's important to me to really know where some of these tales came from. And what I appreciate about Norse mythology is a lot of it is told still with a lot of skepticism, because going back to who's writing these stories and passing them down, it's very obvious that maybe biases are held sometimes, and instead of just accepting those biases as truth, you can read about them and go, I wonder why they got into that situation, or I wonder what really brought them there, instead of just taking at face value like, oh no, X, Y, and Z did this because that's what was written.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the beauty about reworking mythology based off original source material, is it can be for any reason you want it to be, because so much of history is left to interpretation because we weren't there. So I do base mine off the original source material.
The best you can.
The best that I can, of course. And it's always been very important to me that I tell stories from, a Black perspective as well, because clearly Astrid is a Black female main character. So it's important to me to make sure that when I'm basing these stories off of original mythology, I'm also being cognizant of how the Black perspective would fit into that.
And why is that?
Baby, because I'm Black. I'm Black, clearly. But I know what you mean.
I know, but does the audience?
No, audience, exactly. Your girl is Black, okay? I want to read stories about people like me falling in love. Mm-hmm. I remember going into Barnes and Nobles with my best friend when I was young.
No ad plugs. They don't pay us.
They don't pay But Barnes and Nobles, you should. You
keep saying Barnes and Nobles. No, don't
You're
ad
right.
plug
I'm
them.
sorry. Maybe I should say Borders. Borders don't exist anymore.
There you go.
But I remember going into these bookstores, and My God, just like frantically searching for any semblance of a story that had someone like me at the forefront so that I could, of course, better self insert, but also it helps teach you about things about your own culture because you're hearing from voices that are like yours. And while diversity is not something that can be forced and pushed, and everyone should be able to read stories from, people with different perspectives and cultures and things like that, there is something so special and so tangible about finding a book that allows you to appreciate who you are as a person instead of all of the strife and the inborn grief and just being on guard all the time that being black kind of sets you in. It puts you in this mindset of survival all the time. And when you read a story that allows you to just be you and to just fall in love and just to, be magical for a while, it really lets you let go of some of those traumas that people tell you you have to carry with you. I got deep there for a second. I got a little deep there for a second. Let it soak in. But it is something that's really important to me in my writing that I find there will never be a story that I write that's not going to have that kind of perspective in it. And I think it's important for you and I too because, we're in an interracial relationship. And we have been since we're young. And I think it's just helpful to make sure that other people, I feel a little bit responsible maybe for other people who are reading my work, to allow them these spaces where they can be themselves and let loose and forget about their traumas and strife for a while. I have a question for you.
Yes.
You, not being a romance man, what do you think of the kissy scenes? Because we did have a little bit of a heated moment here in Kirk's room.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a very stoic person.
That's why I love you, baby.
I am a rock. It takes quite a bit of fire to get me warmed up. But
and I come with the heat. Okay.
It's getting a little. You can feel it.
You can feel what?
Feel it. Like the fires. The fires are something.
Ooh, the fires.
You can feel. You can feel the fires. There's something impending.
There is something impending.
Something impending.
Yeah, and you know what? That is a perfect lead up, I think, into what our next chapter is called. Do you remember what I told you it was? The next chapter is called, still in part 1, Come.
Can you use it in a sentence?
Can I use it in a sentence? I can use it in a sentence.
What variation? What spelling are we? Is it the?
It is worth noting. It is worth noting that it is spelled COME, and it does not mean what you think it means,
or what might be implied,
or what
based
might be
on
implied.
Circumstance.
Whether or not there is passion in the forthcoming pages is yet to be discerned, but it is called Come, and we are still going to be based in Grothin.
Can you give me some bullet points, some things to look forward to?
Yeah.
Can you give me a little bit of something for what's to come?
Yeah, a little something. So, in the last chapter, I think you remember Kirk saying, with these divine weapons being passed around, clearly he's the protector of the realm of men here on Midgard, on Imran. That's the continent we're on within Midgard. And he's very fearful about what that means for the war at hand. And we'll find out more about who the players are in the war, what we're really dealing with here in the next chapter, because we're going to have a little sit down in the war room and we're going to get to talk to some of the other leaders of men and just kind of do a pulse check on what the actual journey of this story will be. So we're still gearing up here a bit. We do have a lot of lore that we're lying down the groundwork for, but we're going to go over the path we're going to take, some more key players here, and a little bit more of Astrid and Kirk's dynamic because I think they're really feeling each other out. And partnership between them, I think they sense is going to be very important. So I think they're really giving each other a chance.
All right, that sounds good and fun. I'm sure the chapter is going to reflect that very energy if you haven't read it, quote unquote.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And as usual, Slayers, you can find this book on SlayerPublishing.com to read along with us if you'd like. We have it in ebook and we do have a print version.
Do we?
We do have it on ebook. Print right now can be found on Amazon, but we are working to host that ourselves. So hopefully you can buy directly from us soon. A huge thank you to everyone who listened, and join us next time for our next adventure. See you then.